Hello, my name is Jillian Gordon, and today I will be teaching a 4th grade math lesson. The standard is MAFS 4.OA.3.5. The standard states that we are generating a number or shape pattern that follows a given rule. We are identifying apparent features of the pattern that were not explicit in the rule itself. For example, if a pattern says add 3 and the starting number is 1, the student should be able to generate the terms resulting. The vocabulary that we will be using for this lesson is pattern, integer, and multiple. So I will have those displayed here for the students. The prior knowledge for this lesson is students will need to know numbers between 101 and 120, and they will also need to know what a pattern is and how we can identify that in our everyday lives. Okay, so for our lesson introduction, I would have the class come to the carpet and we are going to be transitioning into math. Okay class, it's time to transition into math. Please take out your math notebook and turn to a new page. Today we will be talking about patterns. I would also ask the students where they can see patterns in their everyday life. That would be the starting introduction topic. So where do we see patterns in our everyday life? Good, we can see patterns on tiles, bricks on a building, patterns on a leaf, in a neighborhood, etc. If students were unable to answer my question, I would give them some examples to make sure that they have that foundation skill of knowing what a pattern is and where we could see it in our everyday life. At this time also, I would have a PowerPoint going on in the background and the students would be able to see pictures of patterns. Today we are going to learn about patterns and how we can see patterns in numbers. I would have an anchor chart behind me making predictions of what that could mean for numbers. Students would give me responses and I would write it on the anchor chart. The following slide would be stating what our first problem is, and we would try to figure out the pattern together as a class. The first slide says the following. Jessica made a pattern with dots. She used 2 dots on the first row, and on every row she added 2 more dots. How many are on the third row? I would then ask the class these questions. Okay class, what do we know about Jessica and her pattern? What do we need to find out? And what are we looking for? Some possible answers that I would expect to come back is that we know she's making a pattern with dots, we know the first row has 2 dots, and we know that she's adding 2 to each row. I wouldn't expect those perfect answers responded back to me, but that would be the perfect example I would be looking for. Very good, that is all true. I would write on the smartboard their responses to kind of show the class what we are looking for when we see a problem with patterns. Then on the next slide, I would have the problem written above, but below it would state, how many do we need to add to get to the second row? This would get the students thinking about what we need to do to follow the pattern sequence. Jessica said we need to add 2. What do we need to add 2 to? How many are in the first row? So first I would ask the question, and then the second question is asking them to make sure that they remember that Jessica told us how many are in the first row. The students would hopefully say that there are 2 in the first row, and therefore we are adding 2 to the number 2. So our problem should start off as 2 plus 2 equals 4. Since 2 plus 2 equals 4 class, there are 4 dots on the second row. Does everyone see how we got that? I would look around to make sure that students are either giving me thumbs up, or they're nodding, or they agree on the answer. If anyone seemed to have trouble at this time, I would walk around and make sure that they understand where we are at in the lesson. Great. So now looking at our pattern, we have 2 in the first row and 4 in the second. What do we need to get to the third row? We need to add 2 more because that's the specific rule in the pattern. So this would be reinforcing that idea of that what is the rule. Students need to be able to identify the rule in the given pattern. So in this scenario, Jessica's pattern is adding 2 to every row. So the students need to be able to say, we need to add 2 because the rule is giving us adding 2. We need to add 2 more because that is the rule specified in the pattern. So we will add 4 plus 2 because we have the first row, which is 2, the second row, which is 4, and now we are trying to find the third row, which is what the question is asking us. But in order to get to the third row, we need to get to the second row first, right? I would then look around to make sure everyone knows why I added 2 initially to get to the third row. Okay, so after the class was able to understand that we are adding 2 to get to the first row, I would move on to the second part, finding out how we're going to get to the third row, which is what the question is asking us. The question did not ask us how many are in the second row. It asked us how many was in the third row. So we found what was in the second row so that we could add 2 more to that to get to the third row. Does that make sense as to why we are getting the second row? Hopefully they would say yes at this time. I would walk around the room to make sure that students were on the same page as well. On my next PowerPoint slide, I would have the following displayed. This top one right here is displaying that in the first row, we have 2 dots, 1, 2. Right here, this is displaying the second row, which has 1, 2, 3, 4 dots. And we got that by using Jessica's rule, which was adding 2 to each row. So at the first row, we had 2 plus 2 equals 4 dots. And now at the previous row, we have 4 dots and we're adding 2 again, which gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I would ask the students if they understood what that meant and why we had so many dots on the page. I would ask my students to turn to their partner and discuss how many dots would be in the fourth row. How do you know that there's that many dots in the fourth row? The students would turn to their partner at this time and discuss that there would be 8 dots in the fourth row because the pattern is adding 2 each time. So in the fourth row, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 because they added 2 more to the following row. I would ask the class if we all agree, and in unison, I would hope that they would respond yes. If anyone responded no at this time, I would walk around to make sure that they understand where we are at and why we were adding 2 to each row. My lesson closure would be the following. Okay, everyone, great job today. Remember, patterns can be found in numbers as well, just like we observed with Jessica's problem. It doesn't have to increase by 2, it can increase by 3, 4, even 10. We will practice this today with guided practice. Let's go back to our seats for more practice. At this time, the students would move from the carpet and they would go back to their seat so that we could start the guided practice. For guided practice, we are going to be completing a problem together as a group. As a group, we're going to be working on these rows, row 2 and row 3. On your own, you're going to complete the rest for independent practice. Does that make sense? Renee is making a pattern with her bows. She is adding 4 bows to each row. How many bows will she have for the 7th row? What is our rule? How many is Renee adding to each row? Notice that I asked that question 2 different ways because it's asking us the same thing. What are we adding by? What's our rule? We know that we're adding. I gave them that hint. Now we just need to know by how many. An appropriate response I would expect back from my students is that she's adding 4 to each row or that the pattern is increasing by 4. What I would be asking the students at this time is what do we need to add to our second row, and how are we going to find these things? This is how I would display our guided practice on the whiteboard. I would have guided, and then I would have row 1, 4 bows. I wouldn't have anything else written on the board at this time because this is what we know as mathematicians, and it doesn't really tell us much because I want the students to figure that part out. So for the second row, I would ask the students, what do we need to add? How many more is the pattern asking us to add? And a response I would expect back would be that we are adding 4. So I would write on my board, row 2. In row 2, I would write plus 4. What is 4 plus 4, everyone? 8 bows. Very good. Now we have row 3. Remember, our rule is adding by 4, so can someone tell me what we would add for row 3? We would add 4, which gives us what? 8 plus 4 equals 12. Very good. So now the students would move on to independent practice. During independent practice, they would be completing rows 4, 5, 6, and 7 on their own. Remember, the rule is increasing by 4. So on the board written for them, I would have the rule increase by 4. Since they are in 4th grade, they should be able to identify what the word means. That the word increase can also tell us to add. During this time as well, I would bring the ESC students back to my table and we would complete the independent work together because they might need additional resources in order to complete the work. Thank you.